Is it a struggle? Yes, we have to realize our strengths and our weaknesses. Hi, and welcome back to Why Not? I'm your host, Janice, the show that's helping others to reach their goals, to give motivation and inspiration to all aspects of life. Today, we have a great guest in the studio today, and our topic today is having a sense of humor during the pandemic. Most of the things you hear on TV is doom and gloom or a little down and out, but today we're actually going to have a little bit of sense of humor about it and about bringing comedy into life and dealing with it during pandemic. My guest in the studio is Michelle Krajewski. She is a comedian, former teacher, and help me welcome her to the show. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi. For some reason, when you're on Zoom, you have to do the hand thing. So that's.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Because Comedy One was not your first start. You actually was a teacher.
Yeah. I was always a funny kid, but I was raised in Chicago, and I was raised during the era, like, if you told your mom I would love to tell jokes as a living, they'd be like, get a job, so that wasn't even on the radar. So, but I always liked funny stuff. I liked comedians. I remember listening to George Carlin, the hippy dippy weatherman. I had the 45, and I would listen over and over. And my parents loved comedians. My parents have a great sense of humor, and so I used to listen to comedians on the Tonight Show. Well, anyway, so what I ended up doing is I majored in theater. I got into theater in high school. Majored in theater for 1 year until I realized that I just wanted more of a normal life. I did not want to pursue that. I wanted to, get married and have kids, and that wasn't the path that I thought. But and then I became a Christian, and I thought, okay, I don't know. I just didn't like the kind of the lifestyle, I guess. So I went back to college, and I got my degree. I taught special education. I worked with blind and handicapped kids when I was in grade school, and I loved it. And so I thought, okay, so I specialized in that, so to speak. And then I taught for a little over 8 years, stayed home with my kids. And then I got back into what got this all going was I went on the drama team. I started going to a Willow Creek type church in the suburbs, and they did drama. That was the era. Now they do film clips, everything's. But and so I started. I was doing theater, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I can do this with my kids are young. This is a great outlet and a great ministry and all this stuff." So a friend of mine said, "You're really funny," because I would always be doing comical characters, and even if a character wasn't comical, that's the spin I would do. So she said, "You need to go to Second City," and to go take classes. And I was thinking of doing that when I was in my first year of college. That was my thought. So I thought, oh my goodness, okay. So I went back, and I went through the whole program at Second City and did improv. And then I realized that I wasn't an improviser. I was doing it later anyway, later in life. My kids were younger. So, I got involved in the Christian Comedy Association. I met people. Ken Davis, who's a Christian comedian, came to my church and did an event. And I went to his seminar, and I met Christian comedians. And so I started doing open mics at Christian clubs, and that was the beginning.
Oh, okay. Because normally when people go back or they decide to be a comic, you don't think of Christianity in it. So that's actually a different change. And then you went from being a special ed teacher. We have that in common. I'm also a special ed teacher too. So we have that in common. And you decided to go back to be a comedian, and you went the Christian route. And I love you just said Christian club. I'm like, what's that? I thought that was church.
Well, actually, you know what? There was only, I should say there was one. And I went every Friday night. They had an open mic, and it was a Christian in the back in Plano, Illinois. And that's way out there, way west. And they had a place called Daniel's Den. And they had an open mic night, and I went like every Friday to tell jokes. So I guess it was, but I was the only comedian there. So I would tell, because people were doing, guitar and other kinds of things. But so I guess I should have said singular probably. But then I got involved in, that's how the comedy world is generally everywhere, is that you make connections with people and you hear about, over here, they could use an open, a couple of jokes, and people would suggest that I went to the first Christian comedy conference, and they said, well, talk to churches, and that was what they suggested, is to get involved in church and go up and make anytime you get in front of people was an opportunity for you to, hone your skills, make a few jokes. And so that's kind of the route that I took, and I actually got going. There weren't that many female comics. Now there are a lot. There weren't that many female comics in the Christian Comedy Association. And I started, I worked in Kansas. They flew me out. I was doing women's nights at churches, retreats. And I had a website, kind of a crude, at that time it was a very crude website, but I was starting to actually make money, and I was flown out of town for gigs and for, like I said, usually women's retreats and women's comedy nights and things like that. Okay. And then 2008 hit, the big economic downturn, where you know how that was, if anybody was around during that time. So that's when things kind of shut down for a while. There was a pause in what I was doing.
Now, starting off into a church, and I would say Christian comedy has not been around that long, maybe 20, 30 years. I don't even think it's been around that long. How difficult is that to go into or call up Castro, hey, I'm a comedian, and I want to go in and talk to the congregation, which is really serious and everything else, and I'm going to be making jokes. How easy or hard was that to go try to convince a pastor, let me in to tell my jokes?
Well, actually, it wasn't as hard as you might think, because it was just like in the secular world, late 80s, 90s, there was a comedy boom. But at this time, churches, especially with Willow Creek and drama, churches were looking for that kind. Women of Faith came on, and certain Shonda Pierce and Anita Renfro and those people came on, and they had a segment, a comedic segment, and so it wasn't as hard. Some places, like the more conservative churches, there was a little bit, but you had to kind of convince them to say it's a great outreach. And so it wasn't like I said, it wasn't as hard as you would think.
Okay. Now, I would think you went from teaching to being a comic. How would even God talk to you? Hey, I don't want you actually teaching kids anymore. I want you to tell jokes. When did you get that aha moment from God to say, stop teaching. I really want you to go in the churches and present yourself that way?
Well, I felt the doors were opening. People always say this, that, when a door opens, go through it, just walk through it. And so that's kind of what I did. I prayed a lot, and I just felt like I wanted to do, if the doors were opening and this is what God was leading me to do, then I was going to walk through and take whatever opportunity. My only stipulation was I used to be a Bible study leader and at my church. So I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. I did a lot of stuff. And it was one of the things that got me was the story. It was an Old Testament story about when God actually said, okay, I've had it with you. I'm not going with you. You can get the promised land, but I'm not going. And he said, no, I'm not going to go. If you're not going, I'm not going. If you're not in this, I'm not going. So that always stuck in my head, that I thought, I will not do things to compromise myself. I will not do things, act in an unchristian way to get ahead, if something slams shut, or if I feel like it's the wrong place to be. There are a lot of places that I didn't go to perform, because I did start to go to some secular open mics and things. And if there was something that I shouldn't do, then I'm not going to force it. So that's kind of how I just started doing, but I stayed home with my children. And so I was that afforded me the time to, my husband is very supportive. And so if I got a job, it would be on weekends, a lot of times, like a church, be a Friday night. and I could fly out. So that afforded me the time when I was staying home with my kids. It was like a double thing. You know, I could stay home with my kids for the most part, but also work in the comedy sphere.
Okay. Now, I know you said you started off with the Christian churches, but something happened that made you go into the regular secular world. What happened? Or did someone give you some good advice?
Yes, there was. What happened is that I had, and it was more on my part, I suppose, but I started getting into this more Christianese type. I wasn't myself. I wasn't raised in an evangelical church. I was raised Catholic. Became a Christian later in my young adult life or teen life. So I wasn't raised with that. And I started to pick up some maybe habits that weren't, I don't think it was necessarily God forced on me. It was just something that was in my head that I felt very restrained and very kind of like the breathy, you know, the Christian people. Yes, that was the one thing I noticed in a lot of churches, especially with women's conferences. You know, they're very breathy and, you know, all the Christianese and stuff. So I started to slip into that. And again, it wasn't forced on me. It was just something I think I picked up. And a pastor from Florida who saw me at the Christian Comedy Association, and he's a great friend. He still tells me, I'm your biggest fan. And he said, you know what? You're rough and tumble. You're Chicago, you know, and you're kind of like, you need to get. And so we had a big long talk, and he said, you need to get out of the churches. I think you're being restrained. And it was a pastor. So I thought, well, you know, and he said, do some more clubs. That's what you did before. I mean, you do some open mics, and your mom, I would tell him stories about my mom, and he, you know, he's just flabbergasted because my mom was just a real no nonsense kind of Chicago kind of, and just the stuff that everybody loves my mom. They didn't met her and they love her because she's so funny. So he said, do more of that stuff. So I did. So I started doing more. Again, there were places that I'm like, okay, I'm not going there. But I started taking classes at Zanies and dealing with more the secular comics. And now I'm great friends with people who teach classes at Zanies. I work with Bill Gorgo. I work with Dobie Maxwell, who taught the classes at Zanies. I work with a lot of the old guard headliners, Bob J, a lot of, and so I found those were the doors that were opening more. Because for a while, like I said, 2008, the economy went down, and between talking with my friend Justin, pastor, and I had some personal things. My husband was diagnosed with a genetic disorder, very serious Marfan syndrome, open heart surgery, 9 hours, big. He still has a lot of health issues. Both my daughters are on the spectrum. So those were diagnosed around the same time. And at the time, it was probably a godsend, literally, that I was home during that time because those were when all those things hit. So I was able to stay home and help navigate that. And so as my kids got older, then these secular opportunities were when they were starting to open up. And that's how, now I've done a few churches. I did a Calvary West out in Calvary Church on Naperville, their sister church out west. I did a Christmas program for them last year. So I do, because I work clean, and I'm very clean in the clubs, and my act doesn't change, you know, but I kind of, it's almost a badge of honor, and I shouldn't say because it sounds boastful, but if you can, some people think it's easier to make people laughing in the clubs because, oh, they're drinking, and it's like, it's the exact opposite because people, they're not listening. You have to get them. If I can make a room full of people who don't really care about me, churches are always so nice. They're like, oh, what a blessing. You know, there's always somebody telling you that, you know, so, but in secular settings, they don't. They sit there, and it's like a game of make me laugh sometimes. And so you have to be able to reach through that, make people laugh. And if I can make secular people in an adult setting, like a club, laugh, you know, it's so much more a church.
Now, you went back to school. You said you took classes at Second City. Do you recommend that for people who want to enter in the business of being a comic? I did take for myself, I took a class and I did a couple stand-ups. And I felt for me, it's like, I probably need more classes. Do you really recommend that people take classes if they want to get into the business?
Yes, and it depends. Now, see, for stand-up and improv are totally different, but they are connected in some way. In improv, you learn to trust what comes out of your mouth. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because sometimes, and it's because sometimes all comedians do this.
Mhm.
Even I just ordered Jerry Seinfeld's recent book saying, "Is this something?" Comedians all have this. Is this something? What do you think? Is this funny? Is this good? And
Right.
so that's a comedian's constant think about, oh my goodness, that would be such a funny bit. My sister sent me something and I said, oh my goodness, that would be so funny. I mean, sometimes it's inappropriate. I'll give you an example. It's not bad, but my brother-in-law had some surgery or something. And so she said, well, they wouldn't let him, leave the hospital until until he went to the bathroom, say. And I said, well, that would be a great line of Hallmark cards for adults. And I mean, it's not, I said, that would be so
Okay.
funny to think. It's like, congratulations that you're able to go to the bathroom, so it's those things run through my mind. I've trained myself, and sometimes most of the time it's good, but sometimes it's a real distraction. So anyway, I've forgotten the question. Where I go
Oh,
on the rabbit trails. The comedy is in the rabbit trails. I'm telling you.
right. Just for people to go back and go to school. Wouldn't be bad taking a couple classes, Second
Oh,
City.
yes. Oh, yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for getting me back on. Yeah. So no, Second City, and actually the classes are probably very they're inexpensive comparatively. Like if you go, so here's the deal with Second City, they have two different tiers. They have like an
Oh,
A,
well,
at least they,
yeah, we don't have to go into that.
okay. All right.
No,
Okay.
no, just they can go in. I mean, it's for
Yes.
different levels of even for their background. If they have beginners or if they're
Yes,
people
they
that
have
are
two different levels. Yes. So that shouldn't scare you because you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to be next to somebody who's trained, and they're not. They have two levels.
Okay, good. Also, being in now you do the sector on the secular versus the church. My question is for that. How did you even go about telling your husband, yeah, honey, I'm going to be wanting to hang out at night at like 9 o'clock with a bunch of guys in a bar? How did that even go out okay at home? How was that receptive at home?
You know what? That's an excellent question because a lot of people, first of all, my husband and I have been married 36 years. I was married when I was 5. No, I'm kidding. Don't do the math now. So, my husband and I have a great marriage. We have a great relationship, and he's always been supportive. And first of all, I keep him laughing. He's very serious, so we balance each other out, so we just laugh. We laugh all the time. That's how I knew. He said, you have these conversations. How do you know, when did you know? And it's like, I was laughing all the time. He grew up in a very oppressive kind of depressing atmosphere. And so we were laughing like all the time. So he knew that he was the one who encouraged me to go to this Ken Davis seminar. So, right, correct. What happens is there's got to be a whole level of trust, number one. I talk about him in my act. I talk about my children in my act. I've had writing groups. I've had people come to my house where they've met my husband. My husband's come with me to different events. And we're on Facebook. He's friends with a lot of the comics that I work with on Facebook himself. So right there, that gives you, there's an added level of, I don't know how to put it, but there's a trust. And I make sure I don't put myself in a situation. I've had very few situations where that's been a problem, like where I've been somewhere and somebody's been flirting or something most of the time, because if you're an outspoken woman, I'll tell you, most guys don't want to go near you.
Right. But a lot of women, I mean, I would think nowadays, like even for myself, a lot of women would like to try comedy, but if you do have to go into those sections of either a nightclub or a bar or some type of evening type, you want to be protective of yourself versus just putting yourself out there. So that's why I was asking on that aspect.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, you had talked about the 80s, I think you said the 2008, how things were going. Now we have the pandemic. How is it for you to try to be a comedian and they're closing the bars at some places 11 o'clock, or the bars are closed, or the nightclubs are closed? You can't have more than 25. How do you survive during this time as a comic?
Well, that's again, an excellent question. And we've discussed this with the comedy. You can, there's depending on what you mean by surviving. If you mean financially, very difficult. If you mean psychologically, it's okay. And financially, I will say I'm fortunate. that because that I don't have to depend upon the money that I make performing. I don't have to depend upon that for survival. I know some comedians who have, and there's like gig workers and things through that. So that's a whole separate thing. So a lot of people are saying during this pandemic that it's really going to make or break. A lot of comedians are going to have to go by the wayside. A lot of comedians are getting other jobs. So that's one thing. Psychologically, there's a lot you can do. I've done a few during the summer. I did outdoor shows.
Oh, wow.
They had I just did one in October that was we had separate microphones. It was socially distanced out the Skokie Theater, and it was outside. They had people. It was very well done. I did one inside I have to make sure whoever's booking has to be very aware and takes this very seriously. So I've done a few indoor things. I did a river cruise on a boat. But now that it's closed up, see, this is the first time that it's closed up. This is going to be a very challenging time. So I'm in several writing groups. Some of them are Zoom. I've done a few Zoom shows, but I know, and I'm working on a book, like a lot of people are, and they are, because then it's great.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, right. People work on the book, and then people are going to be home to read the books. So I'm doing that as well. Continuing to write my comedy, knowing that this is going to eventually be okay. I just have I have faith. My own faith helps me psychologically, knowing that, and especially knowing it's easier to know that when everybody's in the same boat. I hate to say, and I don't want to say it's along the level of misery loves company. I don't want to say that, but right. That everybody, and I'm blessed. I feel like so thankful that there are so many people who have so much less than I do.
Right. And this is a time, one of the things that I do also, I do motivational seminars on read time. That it's time to redesign yourself, reinvent. Yes. You got to look outside the box at other different avenues. And this is kind of what you need to do too, since you can't go to the clubs. So it's not like don't get into comedy, but find a different way about it, either Zoom, writing books, outdoors, things like that.
Yes.
So you still recommend people getting into comedy, correct? Or no?
It depends on it. I would recommend it just because I don't understand why everybody isn't in comedy. But it depends on what you expect out of it. And it depends how badly you want it. And what I mean by that is that even in the best circumstances, comedy world is very difficult. And if you expect to support a family, support yourself, I would suggest talking to a lot more seasoned comics than I am, people who've had to go through and have done it, because I think it's very difficult to do that. So if you're going for it because you think I'm going to make some money at it, no. If you want it so bad, if you have something deep inside you that says, oh my goodness, I'm a comedian, I'm funny, people say I should be on stage, I want to do this, then I would say yes. Explore it, because especially if you're home, if you're on Zoom, if you can take a comedy class on Zoom, or you can go to the library. This is one of the best things too. You can go to the library and there are comedy writing books. So there's ways to explore whether this is for you other than having to go someplace.
Okay. Oh, great advice. Great advice. And that's one of the things I like doing on the show is helping people to reach their goals, because I know there's women out there that want to be a comic. I enjoyed my stand-up. I did 2 of them already, and I did enjoy that. It was nice getting that other aspect of my life out of me. I don't need to do stand-up comedy, no, but it was nice to be able to do that. And at least even during the pandemic, people have some options. So where do you think, we have a few more minutes left, where do you think God is leading you to do next? What the next aspect of coming into 2021 do you think is leading you?
That's a good question. On my website, I did start out before, again, everything with the 2008. And then there was another economic downturn. I started doing some public speaking. Like I said, I have 2 kids on the spectrum, raised them. They're both college graduates. I worked in special ed. So I've got topics on my website that to speak to schools, para-educational organizations, churches, youth groups. I've got 5 keynote topics that I do. And hopefully with this book that I'll be able to, I don't know if it's going to be all, stand up is my love. I love writing jokes. I'm a joke writer my mind works that way. So I see that. I don't think I'll ever stop that. I don't really know where that's going to go in the future. If that opens up, fabulous. But I would also like to open up and just encourage others, because I've been through it. I was home with my husband, traveled, almost 90%, and I was home with children who were on the spectrum. Yes.
Right. And you're a teacher, and definitely right now, how remote learning going, teachers really need some inspiration. Parents need inspiration. So I do love that part of your routine does include talking about your teaching experience.
Oh, I've got so much material. And it's subbed, subbing, when you sub, you work with kids. I've worked with preschool kids all the way up to high school. And I did love the student contact, but I got so much material because it's just so different. When I went back into the classroom, I was like, oh my goodness, what happened?
Right. And right now with remote learning, it's some part is serious and some part is like, wow, is this really happening? It gets a little comical at the time, it seems like, just surviving. And
I'm sure.
That whole aspect of, I love that your routines include part of your teaching experience.
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds, please give a piece of advice, 30 seconds, piece of advice for someone want to enter into comedy.
Entering comedy, speak as much as you can, anywhere you can. Don't expect to make money right away. Read books, write jokes, use your comic voice, write everything down, put a notebook pad, walk around with, or on Evernote on your computer, on your phone, write everything, even though, is this something? Is this a bit? This is funny. What makes, study comedians, think about what makes you funny, what type of humor that you love, and follow whatever doors open for you.
Perfect. I hope people take your advice. This show is about having a sense of humor during the pandemic. We had our guest here, wonderful comedian, Michelle Krajewski. I hope people are inspired by what you had to talk to us about. I hope they go to your website, learn more about you. I'm hoping that in the future that you will be doing more and more even remote Zoom to teachers, even to give an inspiration to teachers to give some comedy back. Want to thank everyone for tuning in for Why Not. I'm your host, Janice. Please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook, and we'd love to have you come back another time, Michelle, and share some of your new adventures. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us.